Welcome to the show. Today we are going to engage in a bit of time travel. I want you to close your eyes and try to access a very specific collective memory. It is Friday night. The year is somewhere between 1995 and 2005. You are walking through a glass door, and before you even see the shelves, you are hit with a smell.
It was a very distinct chemical blend.
Right, a blend of industrial carpet cleaner, stale popcorn, and warm plastic. You are standing under the hum of bright fluorescent lights, surrounded by thousands of blue and yellow boxes. In your hand, you are likely holding a laminated membership card with a barcode on the back. You are participating in the global ritual of the video store.
It was definitely more than just a retail experience. It was a cultural ritual that defined weekend entertainment for decades. And for a massive portion of the world, that ritual was controlled by one company. At its absolute zenith in 2004, Blockbuster Video operated 9,094 stores globally. They employed over 84,000 people. To put that into perspective, the employee headcount of Blockbuster at its peak was larger than the entire population of cities like Santa Fe, New Mexico, or Scranton, Pennsylvania.
The scale is almost impossible to wrap your head around, especially considering how quickly it vanished from the landscape. We are, of course, talking about Blockbuster, but our goal for this analysis is not to just recount the nostalgia or make the easy observation that streaming technology replaced physical media. That is the surface-level narrative. We want to conduct a forensic analysis of the specific business decisions, the logistical infrastructure, and the boardroom warfare that built this empire and then dismantled it. We will be pulling from a wide variety of financial and historical sources to piece this together.
Precisely. If you strip away the movie posters and the popcorn, this is not really a story about Hollywood. It is fundamentally a story about data management, supply chain logistics, and the brutal transition from a rental economy to a subscription economy. It is also a story that continues to the present day. While the stores are gone, the corporate entity has had a tumultuous afterlife involving stock market anomalies and bankruptcy filings regarding the parent company as recently as the summer of 2025.
We have a massive timeline to cover. We are going to track this from the very beginning, which starts not in a film studio, but in the oil fields of Texas. We will look at the aggressive expansion under Wayne Huizenga, the catastrophic missed opportunities with Netflix, the bizarre partnership with Enron, and the final decline leading to the last surviving store in Bend, Oregon.
It is a comprehensive rise and fall that serves as a vital case study for business evolution.
Let's start at the foundation. Most people assume Blockbuster was founded by a movie buff or a media executive, but the DNA of the company is entirely rooted in database management. The founder, David Cook, was a software engineer. He founded a company called Cook Data Services in 1978.
Yes, David Cook was definitely not a movie mogul. His original business was creating software for the oil and gas industries in Texas. He was dealing with tracking resources, flow rates, and inventory for energy companies. However, the oil industry is notoriously cyclical. In the early 1980s, the oil market collapsed. Cook's business was suffering, and he was desperately looking for a pivot. It was actually his wife, Sandy Cook, who suggested looking into the video rental business.
Cook approached this new industry with the mind of a data architect. He spent months studying the existing video stores in Dallas. In the early 80s, video rental was very much a mom-and-pop industry. Stores were small, cluttered, and disorganized. They tracked their inventory using index cards or simple ledger books. You would walk in, ask for a movie, and the clerk would have to physically flip through a box of cards to see who had it or if it was returned. It was a high-friction, low-efficiency model.
Cook saw that friction specifically as a data problem. He realized that if you applied the same logic used to track massive oil equipment to videotapes, you could revolutionize the efficiency of the entire process. He used the capital from selling a subsidiary of his software company to buy into an existing franchise in Dallas called VideoWorks.
And this is where a seemingly minor aesthetic dispute altered the course of business history. Cook was ready to open his franchise location. He had the location selected, but he wanted to decorate the interior with a specific blue and yellow color scheme. He felt it was clean, modern, and distinct.
But the owners of the VideoWorks franchise refused. They had strict brand guidelines and wouldn't allow him to paint the walls blue and yellow. Because of that refusal, Cook walked away from the franchise agreement and decided to open his own independent store. He kept the colors and named it Blockbuster Video.
That decision led directly to the opening of the first Blockbuster store on October 19, 1985, in Dallas, Texas. And because Cook was designing this from the ground up, he didn't use index cards. He implemented a barcode system,
which was incredibly revolutionary for a small retail business in 1985. Every single tape had a unique barcode. Every customer membership card had a unique barcode.
This sounds completely standard today, but we really have to contextualize it for 1985. This meant that a clerk could scan a tape and a card, and the computer would instantly link the two. It eliminated the manual writing, the searching through boxes, and the human errors. It allowed them to process customers rapidly. On a busy Friday night, a mom-and-pop store would have a line out the door because checkout took 5 minutes per person. Blockbuster could do it in seconds.
The other massive advantage of the database approach was inventory size. That first store carried 8,000 VHS tapes and 2,000 beta tapes. A typical competitor might have had 500 to 1,000 tapes in total. Cook knew that selection was the primary driver for customers. If you walked in, you needed to find something you wanted. To support this massive inventory, they built a $6 million warehouse in Garland, Texas.
That warehouse is the absolute key to understanding early Blockbuster. It wasn't just a store, it was a logistics hub. They had a centralized distribution center that could rapidly deploy tapes to stores based on real-time demand. Cook's software could track which titles were renting well in which specific neighborhoods. They could tailor the selection based on local demographics because they had the hard data. They were doing data analytics long before it was a corporate buzzword.
Exactly. By 1987, the model was entirely proven. They had 19 stores and were growing steadily. But to go from a successful local chain to a global empire required a completely different kind of leadership. This is where Wayne Huizenga enters the story.
Wayne Huizenga is a legendary figure in American business, but not for media. He was a co-founder of Waste Management, the garbage disposal giant. He was a master of logistics, routing, and scaling service businesses. Initially, he was skeptical of the video business. He thought it might just be a fad. But his associate, John Melk, convinced him to take a closer look.
Melk pointed out two crucial things to Huizenga. First, the incredible efficiency of Cook's barcode and warehouse model. It was a repeatable system that could be replicated anywhere. Second, and perhaps more importantly for Huizenga, was the family-friendly policy. Blockbuster had a strict, uncompromising rule against stocking mature content or X-rated films.
In the 1980s, a significant portion of revenue for independent video stores came from the back room, or the adult section. It was a very high-margin category for those smaller operators. By refusing to stock it, Blockbuster differentiated itself as a safe place for parents to send their children. It allowed them to market themselves essentially as the McDonald's of video.
That comparison to McDonald's is highly accurate in terms of operations as well. Huizenga applied the Ray Kroc model of extreme standardization and rapid expansion. Once Huizenga and Melk took control, they hit the accelerator hard. They brought the logistical rigor of waste management to the movement of VHS tapes across the country. The expansion was unprecedented in retail history. At the height of the Huizenga era, Blockbuster was opening a new store every 24 hours.
Just think about the sheer logistics of that for a moment. Opening a retail location every single day. That means finding real estate, negotiating leases, building out the shelving, installing the complex computer systems, hiring and training staff, and stocking the shelves with thousands of tapes. Doing that once a month is hard. Doing it daily is an industrial feat.
They achieved this rapid growth by buying out the competition just as much as building new stores. They were aggressively rolling up the industry. They acquired Major Video. In 1990, they bought Errol's, which was a significant rival on the East Coast with over 250 stores. They were actively consolidating a highly fragmented market into a single corporate monolith.
However, this expansion wasn't without significant legal threats. In 1989, they faced a massive lawsuit from Nintendo. This is a crucial moment that often gets overlooked in the broader narrative. Nintendo sued Blockbuster to stop them from renting out video game cartridges.
Nintendo's core argument was that renting games destroyed their retail sales. A new game cost $50 or $60. If a kid could rent it for $4, beat the game over the weekend and return it, they would never actually buy it. Nintendo lobbied the U.S. Congress heavily to ban the practice of renting software entirely. If they had succeeded, it would have stripped Blockbuster of one of its most lucrative revenue streams.
Right, because renting games was almost as big of a draw as the movies. If you walked into a Blockbuster on a Friday, the game section was always crowded.
Fortunately for Blockbuster, they won the lawsuit. The courts ruled that the first sale doctrine applied to video games just like it did to physical books or movies. Once Blockbuster bought the physical game cartridge, they had the legal right to rent it out. This vital legal victory secured the video game rental market, which became a foundational pillar of their business model for the next 2 decades.
They continued to diversify their holdings. In 1992, they acquired Sound Warehouse and Music Plus to create Blockbuster Music. They invested in Spelling Entertainment Group, which was Aaron Spelling's massive production company. They were becoming a general entertainment conglomerate. But Huizenga, for all his remarkable success, was always looking for the cliff. He was a notoriously nervous owner.
He was very concerned about the future of technology. Specifically, he was closely watching the cable industry. In 1991, Time Warner announced a major upgrade to their cable systems that would allow for more channels and potentially video-on-demand services. When that announcement was made public, Blockbuster's stock dropped 10% in 3 days. Huizenga realized then that the physical rental model had a definitive expiration date, even if it was years away. He wanted to sell while the asset was at its absolute peak value.
That exit strategy materialized in 1994. Wayne Huizenga sold Blockbuster to Viacom for $8.4 billion.
This merger changed the fundamental nature of the company entirely. Viacom, led by Sumner Redstone, didn't buy Blockbuster because they had a deep love for video stores. They bought it because they were entrenched in a massive bidding war for Paramount Pictures. They needed immediate cash to finance that acquisition. Blockbuster was a cash-generating machine. So under Viacom, Blockbuster went from being a growth-focused entrepreneurial company to being a cash cow, used primarily to fund other parts of the Viacom media empire.
To truly understand why Viacom wanted that cash flow, we need to break down exactly how Blockbuster made money. It wasn't just about charging $4 for a rental. It was about how they acquired the tapes in the first place. This brings us to the concept of revenue sharing.
This is undoubtedly the most important economic mechanic in the history of the video store industry. Traditionally, the model worked like this. A studio releases a movie on VHS. They sell that tape to rental stores for a high flat fee, usually around $65 per tape. They charged that much up front because they knew the store would rent it out 50 times and make a significant profit.
So if a small store owner wanted to stock 20 copies of a massive hit, they would have to pay $1,300 up front. For a small business, that is a huge capital outlay. It severely limited how many copies they could afford to buy. That is why independent stores often only had 1 or 2 copies of a new release, and they were always rented out when you got there.
Sumner Redstone and Viacom pioneered a radical change to this model. They approached the film studios with a completely different offer. Instead of paying $65 per tape, Blockbuster would pay a nominal fee, maybe $2 to $4, just to cover the physical cost of the plastic and shipping. In exchange, Blockbuster agreed to track every single rental of that tape and give the studio a percentage of the rental fee. It was typically a split of about 40% to Blockbuster and 60% to the studio.
This shifted the financial risk entirely. Blockbuster no longer had to put up millions of dollars in capital to stock new releases. They could get thousands of copies for almost nothing up front. This allowed them to launch the famous Guaranteed in Stock campaign. You could walk into a Blockbuster and see a new release wall with 200 copies of the exact same movie. Independent stores simply couldn't compete with that sheer volume.
It absolutely destroyed the independent competition, but it also profoundly homogenized the selection. Because the revenue share model incentivized high turnover and constant rentals, Blockbuster focused entirely on new releases and major blockbuster hits. The long tail of cinema, foreign films, classics, documentaries, cult favorites was steadily pushed off the shelves to make room for 50 more copies of the latest action movie. It fundamentally changed the cultural consumption of film, actively narrowing what was easily available to the average person.
Now we move into the late 1990s. The technology that Huizenga feared is starting to arrive. The DVD format launches in 1997. At the exact same time, a new CEO takes over, John Antioco. He came from Taco Bell. His tenure is defined by a series of decisions that in hindsight seem disastrous. The first major one involves Warner Brothers and the DVD.
In 1997, the DVD was still unproven technology. Warner Brothers was desperate to make the format succeed and achieve market penetration. They approached John Antioco with a very specific proposal. They offered Blockbuster the exclusive rental rights for new DVDs. Blockbuster would get the movies before they went on sale at retail stores. In exchange, Warner Brothers wanted that same 40% revenue share deal on the rentals.
Blockbuster looked at this offer and said no. They either didn't think the DVD would take off, or they simply didn't want to give up that margin on a new format.
It was a critical error in judgment. Warner Brothers was furious at the rejection. To save the DVD format, They decided to completely bypass the rental market and sell directly to consumers. They lowered the wholesale price of DVDs significantly. This allowed big box retailers like Walmart, Target, and Best Buy to sell new DVDs for $15 or even $10. Suddenly, the entire mathematical equation changed for the consumer. Why drive to Blockbuster and rent a movie for $5 and worry about late fees when you could own it forever for $12? By rejecting the Warner Brothers deal, Blockbuster inadvertently created a massive low-cost retail market that fundamentally undercut their core rental business.
We often hear the narrative that Blockbuster just ignored streaming, but that isn't entirely true based on the sources. In the year 2000, they actually signed a massive deal with Enron to develop video-on-demand technology.
This is a fascinating and often completely forgotten chapter. Enron, before its spectacular collapse, was trading broadband capacity and building extensive fiber optic networks. In July of 2000, Blockbuster announced a 20-year exclusive agreement with Enron to deliver movies over this network. They were actively planning to stream movies directly to people's homes.
A 20-year deal signed in the year 2000. That clearly shows they had the right idea about the future of delivery.
They absolutely had the vision, but the technology infrastructure and the partner were completely wrong. The deal collapsed within 9 months. By March 2001, Enron formally canceled the partnership. They claimed Blockbuster couldn't secure the digital distribution rights from the studios fast enough. Of course, Enron was also actively cooking its books and was mere months away from its own historical implosion. But it proves that Blockbuster leadership knew, on some level, that digital delivery was the inevitable endgame.
And then we arrive at the most famous story in the history of the company, the meeting with Netflix.
Yes. The year is 2000. Netflix was a small startup, struggling to survive. They were losing significant amounts of money on the postal shipping costs of sending DVDs. Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, flew down to Dallas to meet directly with John Antioco. Hastings proposed selling Netflix to Blockbuster for $50 million. He pitched the idea that Netflix could seamlessly run Blockbuster's online brand and infrastructure. $50 million. To put that in context, adjusted for inflation to today's money, that is roughly $86.3 million. For a company like Blockbuster, which had billions in annual revenue, that was a rounding error. They spent more than that on marketing popcorn and candy at the checkout counters. They rejected the offer outright. One of the executives in the meeting later recalled that Antioco struggled not to openly mock Hastings' proposal. They viewed the mail order model as niche and inherently inefficient. They didn't see any value in the algorithms or the small subscriber base Netflix had built. They believed that if online rental truly became a big market, they could just build it themselves and easily crush Netflix with their brand recognition. It was pure corporate hubris.
Fast forward to 2004, Blockbuster finally separates from Viacom. They are an independent company again, but they are loaded with substantial debt from the separation agreement. And Netflix is steadily growing its subscriber base. This leads to the era of the boardroom wars. In 2005, Blockbuster launches a campaign that was meant to win back customers, but ended up deeply alienating them. The campaign was called No More Late Fees.
This was a public relations disaster of epic proportions. They ran massive ad campaigns declaring the end of late fees. Customers naturally interpreted this to mean they could keep the movie as long as they wanted without any financial penalty. But the fine print told a very different story. If you kept a rental more than 8 days past the due date, the internal system automatically converted it to a sale. You were immediately charged the full retail purchase price of the DVD, which could be $25 or $30.
So you think you are just a week late, and suddenly you see a $30 charge on your credit card statement?
Exactly. And if you return the DVD after being charged, they would eventually credit the purchase price back to your card, but they would keep a restocking fee. So in reality, there were still fees. They were just disguised as automatic purchase charges and restocking penalties. This felt incredibly deceptive to consumers. It led to intense investigations by attorneys general in 48 different states. Blockbuster had to pay out major settlements for false advertising and misrepresentation. It damaged the brand's integrity right at the exact moment when they needed customer loyalty the most to fight off Netflix.
Amidst this operational chaos, the famous activist investor Carl Icahn enters the picture. He started buying up Blockbuster stock in 2005 and waged an aggressive proxy war to get control of the board of directors. He was largely critical of John Antioco and his strategic direction.
I can argue that Antioco was paid entirely too much. His total compensation package was reported at $51.6 million in 2004. Icahn also felt that the company was spending far too much money trying to chase Netflix's online model. This conflict came to a critical head over a new product called Total Access.
Total Access was launched in 2007. And looking at the mechanics, it was actually a brilliant product. It was Blockbuster's direct answer to Netflix. You could rent a DVD online, receive it in the mail, and then this was the absolute killer feature. You could take that physical DVD to a local Blockbuster store and exchange it for a free movie rental right there on the spot.
It brilliantly solved the biggest problem with Netflix, which was the delay in gratification. With Netflix, you had to mail the movie back and wait several days for the postal service to deliver the next one. With Total Access, you could get a new movie immediately. It was wildly successful with consumers. Blockbuster was gaining new subscribers faster than Netflix for a brief period. Reed Hastings was actually terrified. He later admitted in interviews that Total Access was the one specific thing that could have killed Netflix.
But there was a significant financial cost to this program.
It was incredibly expensive to maintain. Every time a customer exchanged a movie in the store for free, Blockbuster lost about $2 in potential rental revenue and associated labor costs. They were burning cash rapidly to build market share and starve Netflix. Carl Icahn looked at the balance sheet and demanded they stop the bleeding immediately. He didn't care about the long-term strategic victory against Netflix. He cared primarily about the quarterly financial losses and the stock price.
So in July of 2007, the board sided with Icahn. John Antioco was pushed out of the company. He was replaced by James Keyes, the former CEO of 7-Eleven. Keyes came in with a strict mandate to cut costs and refocus the company on the physical retail stores.
Keyes immediately gutted the Total Access program. He removed the free in-store exchange feature. He raised the price of the online subscription to improve margins. He publicly stated that Netflix was not their primary competition, but rather Walmart and Apple were the real threats. He shifted the company's focus entirely back to selling physical DVDs and high-margin retail items like candy in the physical stores. That single decision effectively handed the streaming and mail order future directly to Netflix. Blockbuster's online subscriber growth flatlined almost overnight.
From there, it was a slow, painful slide toward insolvency. In 2008, there was a bizarre attempt by Blockbuster to purchase Circuit City.
That move confused financial analysts everywhere. Circuit City was an electronics retailer that was already spiraling rapidly toward its own bankruptcy. Analysts viewed it as two drowning swimmers grabbing onto each other. Fortunately, after looking closely at Circuit City's internal financial books, Blockbuster withdrew the acquisition offer. Circuit City liquidated completely shortly after.
The debt load from the Viacom separation and the declining retail revenue was becoming unmanageable. By July of 2010, Blockbuster was officially delisted from the New York Stock Exchange because the stock price had fallen so low. In September of 2010, they officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They had nearly $900 million in accumulated debt.
Even in bankruptcy, there was still some hope for a corporate restructure. In 2011, the remaining assets of the company were put up for auction. Dish Network, the satellite television provider, won the auction with a final bid of $320 million.
The logic behind the purchase was that Dish could use the well-known Blockbuster brand to sell a new streaming service, or possibly use the massive network of stores as local customer service centers. They launched a service called Blockbuster Movie Pass, but it was just too little, too late. The fundamental economics of operating thousands of physical retail stores simply didn't work in a world that had permanently moved to digital distribution.
Dish realized very quickly that the physical stores were massive money pits.
Yeah.
They intended to keep 90% of them open initially, but the math didn't support it. They began closing them in rapid waves. By January of 2014, Dish closed the very last remaining corporate-owned stores in the United States. The retail empire was effectively dead.
While we often focus on the United States, the international operations and their subsequent collapse were just as dramatic. Let's look at the United Kingdom. Blockbuster UK was a massive operation.
They had over 800 stores in the UK after acquiring Cinevision back in 1992. But they faced the exact same digital headwinds. In 2013, the UK arm went into administration, which is the British legal equivalent of bankruptcy protection. A private equity firm attempted to save it and restructure the operations, but the debt burden was simply too high. They went into administration a second time that exact same year. By the end of 2013, every single store in the UK was permanently closed.
And Japan. The failure in Japan is a very specific case study in cultural mismanagement and corporate inflexibility. Blockbuster entered the Japanese market in 1991.
They struggled immediately for two distinct reasons. First, the real estate dynamics. Japanese retail locations are typically much smaller, and Blockbuster stubbornly insisted on their large, 5,000 square foot American-style footprint, which was incredibly hard to find and prohibitively expensive in cities like Tokyo. But the much bigger issue was the inventory content. In Japan, mature content accounted for roughly 35% of the entire video rental market. It was a massive revenue driver for local shops. Blockbuster rigidly applied its American family-friendly policy to Japan and absolutely refused to stock any mature content.
So they voluntarily walked away from 35% of the potential revenue before they even opened the doors?
Exactly. Local competitors like Tsutaya stocked everything a customer might want. Customers naturally went where the comprehensive selection was.
Yeah.
Blockbuster couldn't possibly compete with one hand tied behind its back financially. They then bled money and eventually exited the Japanese market entirely in 1999.
We should also briefly mention Discovery Zone. I think a lot of people have a vague nostalgic memory of Blockbuster being involved with that.
They were heavily involved. In 1993, Blockbuster invested significant capital into Discovery Zone, the indoor children's playground chain. The corporate theory was based on synergy. Families rent movies, families go to play zones. Blockbuster eventually took full operational control in 1995. But the actual business model of maintaining giant indoor physical playgrounds was incredibly difficult and capital-intensive. Discovery Zone went bankrupt in 1996. It was just another major distraction that burned through capital that should have been used for technological innovation and digital infrastructure.
We also see a similar pattern in Canada. Blockbuster Canada tried diversifying by selling mobile phones in 2009 through a partnership with Win Mobile. But by 2011, after failing to find a buyer, all Canadian stores were shuttered. After the corporate shutdown in 2014, the Blockbuster brand entered a strange twilight phase. Because of how the franchise agreements worked, independent owners who had previously paid for the rights to the name could keep operating their specific locations as long as they continued to pay licensing fees to Dish Network.
These were the resilient holdouts. But they had absolutely no corporate support network. They had no centralized distribution center sending them the new movies every week. The owners of these franchise stores literally had to go to Walmart or Target on Tuesday mornings, buy 50 copies of the new DVD releases at retail price, and then put them on their own shelves to rent out. The profit margins under that system were razor thin.
One by one, those franchise locations closed down. Alaska had several stores that lasted much longer than most, primarily because internet data was so expensive there that digital streaming just wasn't financially viable for the average resident. But eventually, even those closed too. Which leaves us with the very last one, the specific store located in Bend, Oregon.
The Bend store has truly become a modern folk legend. As of 2019, it officially became the only Blockbuster left operating anywhere on the planet. The manager there, Sandy Harding, has done an absolutely incredible job keeping the doors open and the lights on. It is honestly less of a traditional video store now and more of a cultural tourist destination and museum. They sell a massive amount of branded merchandise, t-shirts, and physical nostalgia. In 2020, they even partnered with Airbnb to let people book a 90s-themed sleepover inside the store itself. It is a powerful testament to the deep emotional connection people still maintain with the brand.
While the Bend store is a heartwarming story of survival, the corporate entity, the actual shell company left behind after the bankruptcy, has been involved in some very modern financial weirdness. There is a specific stock ticker symbol still out there, BB Liquidating Inc.
This is what financial analysts call a zombie stock. BB Liquidating is merely the remnant shell of the old bankruptcy estate. It holds no real assets. It has 0 employees. It is not connected in any way to the Bend store or to Dish Network's current operations. The stock is effectively mathematically worthless. The company itself has explicitly issued legal statements telling investors there is 0 equity value. Yet in January of 2021, during the massive retail trading craze surrounding meme stocks, amateur traders suddenly began buying millions of shares of BB Liquidating.
The stock price surged thousands of % in a matter of days for no underlying reason other than internet nostalgia and algorithmic trading momentum.
It was a truly bizarre postscript to the financial history of the company. People were literally gambling real money on the completely empty ghost of a dead corporation.
And finally, that brings us right up to the present day. The financial turbulence isn't quite over for the current owners of the brand. Dish Network is now part of a larger telecommunications company called EchoStar.
That is correct. And the financial curse attached to these assets seems to continue unabated. On June 6, 2025, it was heavily reported that EchoStar was preparing to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. They had missed over $500 million in scheduled interest payments and were struggling under a mountain of debt related to their mobile network build-out. So the direct corporate lineage that still legally holds the Blockbuster trademark is once again facing complete insolvency.
When you look at the entire arc of this data, from David Cook's innovative barcode database in 1985 to the potential bankruptcy of EchoStar in 2025, what is the real overarching lesson here?
The primary lesson is that Blockbuster wasn't simply killed by the invention of a single technology like streaming. It was killed by a compounding sequence of specific corporate choices. They prioritized short-term cash flow from punitive late fees over building long-term customer loyalty. They prioritized making the massive debt payments to Viacom over investing heavily in digital infrastructure. And ultimately, when they did finally have the right competitive product and total access, they let a short-sighted boardroom dispute kill it.
They built an incredibly efficient, heavily fortified fortress around the physical VHS tape, and when the entire world moved on to a different format, they were permanently trapped inside their own walls.
That is an exceptionally accurate assessment. Operational efficiency is critical for growth, but strategic adaptability is the only thing that guarantees survival.
It leaves you with something to consider the next time you are scrolling through a digital menu for 30 minutes, entirely unable to decide what to watch. The friction of having to drive to a physical store and pick from a curated, limited selection of new releases actually forced a decision. The complete removal of all friction hasn't necessarily made the choice any easier or the experience any better.
The paradox of choice is a very real psychological phenomenon. Our current digital models offer infinite selection, but they often result in less overall satisfaction.
Thank you for providing this extensive historical context today.
It was a highly productive analysis.
Thanks for listening.